Number 3. Barry Gibbs. By the mid-1980s, Barry Gibbs was the father of one son. He was a postal worker and a Navy veteran of Vietnam. He lived in Brooklyn, New York. In the mid-1980s, he was having problems with drug addiction. On November 4th, 1986, the body of 27-year-old Virginia Robertson was found under a blanket near a bridge in Brooklyn. Robertson was a sex worker. She had been strangled to death with a rope. New York Police Department Detective Louis Eppolito was assigned to the case. Eppolito spoke to a jogger who claimed he saw a white man pull the body out of a car and then place a blanket over it. He said the man was wearing red jeans. When the perpetrator noticed the jogger, he ran back to his car and drove off. A park police officer also told a responding officer that he saw the perpetrator as well. Eppolito zeroed in on 38-year-old Barry Gibbs, who knew the victim. The police confronted Gibbs after he finished his mail route and took him to the station. Gibbs allowed the police to search his home. During their search, the police found a pair of red jeans like the ones the jogger described. However, the red jeans did not fit Gibbs. Police also discovered that Gibbs owned a gray car, again described by the jogger. However, Gibbs' car was inoperable. The car had 2 flat tires and had not been driven in a long time. Gibbs agreed to stand in the police lineup. He felt that this would prove his innocence. While there, the jogger who saw the killer dump the body picked Gibbs from the lineup. But there was a problem. The jogger said that the man he saw was around 5'6" and weighed about 140 pounds, and Gibbs was much larger than that. Also, the park police officer was never asked to view the lineup. Despite a serious lack of evidence, Gibbs was charged with murder, and he was held in jail until his trial. During Gibbs's March 1988 trial, the prosecution based their case on 2 witness testimonies. The first was the jogger who picked Gibbs out of the lineup. The prosecution's second witness was a jailhouse informant who supposedly had a close relationship with a criminal investigator with the Department of Corrections, and he also had an extensive arrest record. The informant testified that Gibbs admitted to the murder while they were in jail. Gibbs's defense lawyer brought in a jailhouse witness who refuted that claim and told the court that Gibbs maintained his innocence while in jail during their 4 months together. Barry Gibbs was found guilty of second-degree murder. On March 25, 1988, he was sentenced to 20 years of prison. In 1992, Gibbs started writing to lawyers asking if they could use DNA testing to clear his name. But no one helped him, and he remained in prison. 5 years later, Gibbs contacted the Innocence Project, a New York-based association that helps the wrongly convicted. The Innocence Project agreed to take on his case. They filed a motion to have the rope used in the murder to be tested for DNA. But after repeated searches, the police could not find the rope. It turned out that the whole case file was missing. The Innocence Project had no choice but to stop working on his case. Gibbs was devastated. He said, "I was sitting in my cell one day, I had all my legal papers laid out, and I thought, this is the end. The Innocence Project left me. I have no hope. My son believes I did the crime. After all those years telling him I am coming home, there is DNA. I didn't come home. I surrendered and I gave up. It was not only the loss of my freedom, but the loss of my life." Gibbs eventually accepted that he would die in prison for a crime he did not commit. He took out an insurance policy and bought a cemetery plot. But then, in 2005, his case took a bizarre turn. The police started investigating Louis Alipo, the lead detective on Gibbs' case, for ties to organized crime. Eppolito had since retired from the force. Allegations of corruption have been following the detective and his partner, Stephen Caracappa, for almost a decade. When the police searched Eppolito's home, they found Gibbs's case file. This led the Innocence Project to restart working on Gibbs' case. They requested that the U.S. Attorney's Office reopen the case. When they did, they found more evidence backing Gibbs' innocence claim. Later that year, the jogger who testified against Gibbs recanted their identification of Gibbs. He claimed that he was pressured to testify after Ippolito made threats against his family. In their criminal investigation, the police learned that Ippolito and Caracappa had provided information to the Lucchese crime family. They even carried out hits for the mob. Investigators connected them to at least 8 murders committed between 1986 and 1990. The 2 former detectives were arrested in March 2005. After serving 19 years in prison, in September 2005, Barry Gibbs was cleared of murder and released. Gibbs' newfound freedom was difficult for him. He had no money, and he was no longer in contact with his family. His lawyer, Zoe Potkin, helped him get back on his feet by finding him a place to live. In 2006, Gibbs sued the city of New York. The city settled out of court for $9.9 million, the largest personal settlement at the time. "The settlement I'm happy with," Gibbs said in an interview. "It was my bottom line settlement." In April 2006, Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa were found guilty on 8 counts of murder, among other charges. In August 2009, Ippolito was sentenced to 100-plus years, and Caracappa was sentenced to 80-plus years. They were also fined $4 million. Gibbs attended the sentencing hearing for the disgraced detectives. He was escorted out of the court after shouting, "Do you remember me? I'm the guy you put away for 19 years." After Gibbs was released from prison, he had to deal with severe health problems. In 2009, Gibbs was diagnosed with colon cancer. Despite Gibbs' problems, he did find happiness on the outside. He connected with his son and 3 grandchildren. He also married his childhood friend, Myrna. Barry Gibbs passed away on March 23, 2018, at 70 years old. After his exoneration, Gibbs remained close to his attorney, Zoe Potkin. Upon his death, she posted a few words on the Innocence Project's website to remember her friend. She wrote Barry loved life and lived it to the fullest. Everyone who met Barry fell in love with him. I think it was because he was the most authentic and honest person. He spoke the raw truth and just told it as he saw it. There was no pretense about him. He was old New York, had an incredible sense of humor, the biggest heart, and was sharp and never missed a beat. He was a man of his word. If he said it, he was going to do it. You could always count on Barry. Louis Ippolito died in federal custody in 2019 at the age of 71. Stephen Caracappa had died 2 years earlier in prison. He was 74. Unfortunately, the murder of 27-year-old Virginia Robertson is still unsolved. Number 2. Daniel Whitworth. On August 28, 2014, a dog walker found the dead body of 22-year-old Gabriel Cavari propped up against a cemetery wall at the St. Margaret's Church in East London, England. Cavari was a gay man who was born in Slovakia. He left Slovakia because he felt that people were too conservative and intolerant. Cavari's mother and brother described him as, quote, a gifted artist who wanted to make a difference, unquote. Cavari had died of a GHB overdose. GHB is a drug that gives users a euphoric high in low doses. It's also used as a date rape drug. Large doses can be fatal. Cavari's death was considered non-suspicious but unexplained. 3 weeks later, on September 20th, 2014, the same dog walker discovered another body propped up against the cemetery wall where Cavari's body had been found. He was 21-year-old Daniel Whitworth. He had also died of a GHB overdose. In Whitworth's hand was an apparent suicide note. In the note, Whitworth admits to killing Gabriel Cavari and then he took his own life because he felt guilty. The news shocked Whitworth's family and friends. They insisted that he would never take his own life. Whitworth worked as a chef and he had lived with his boyfriend for 3 years. By most accounts, he had a promising future. But based on the note, the police believe that Whitworth had killed Kavari and then took his own life. Then, on September 14, 2015, nearly a year after Whitworth's death, the body of a third man was found against the same cemetery wall. He was identified as 21-year-old Jack Taylor. Taylor worked as a forklift operator. Medical examiners said that he died from a mixture of drugs and alcohol. Near his body was a bottle of GHB. The police believed it was an accidental death. Taylor's family did not believe he would have accidentally overdosed because he didn't touch drugs. Taylor's sisters blasted the police for not conducting an investigation. They pressured them to open one. The police finally relented, and they found CCTV footage of Taylor with another man. The sisters pressured the police to release the images of the man. The police reluctantly did so. Then, someone identified the man as 40-year-old Stephen Port. Port lived about 550 yards from the graveyard. The police were already aware of Port. He was connected to another GHB overdose death that happened before the other three men had died. On June 15, 2014, Stephen Port contacted 23-year-old Anthony Walgate through a male escort website, Sleepy Boys. Port, posing under the alias of Joe Dean, offered him £800, which he never had, to stay the night with him on June 17th. Walgate occasionally worked as a male escort. His friends said that he was choosy with clients and only went with men he felt safe with. He was an aspiring fashion designer in his second year as a fashion student at Middlesex University. Port and Walgate met at Barking Station on June 17th. On the morning of June 19, 2014, 999, the UK's version of 911, received an anonymous phone call. The caller said that Walgate's body was propped up against the communal entrance to Port's apartment building. He thought that the young man was drunk or having a seizure. When first responders arrived, they discovered Walgate was dead. His underwear was backwards and turned inside out. The medical examiner found a lethal dose of GHB in his system. Despite bruising on Walgate's arms, the police concluded that his death was not suspicious. A week later, the police discovered that Port had hired Walgate as an escort. When confronted, Port changed his story, now claiming he knew Walgate. The police also determined that he was the one who had called 999. The police charged Port with perverting the justice, but they did not charge him for causing Walgate's death. The police had failed to check Port's background in the police national database. If they did, they would have found out that in 2012 he was accused of rape. The police had only investigated Walgate's background. Port was later released on bail. The police had seized his laptop, but they had left it untouched. While he was on bail, Kavari and Whitworth were killed. In March 2015, Port was sent to jail for perverting the justice. He was released on June 4, 2015, with an electronic tag. Months later, in September 2015, Taylor was killed. After Taylor's death, the police investigated Port. Stephen Port was born in Southend-on-Sea, England, in 1975. When he was a year old, his family moved to Dagenham, where his parents still reside. Port came out as gay in the mid-2000s. By that time, he was living alone in his London apartment. After dropping out of art school, he worked as a chef at a bus station in West Ham. Port rarely left his home, and he had an obsession with children's toys. The few friends he had thought his behavior could be strange. One friend said that Port had a voracious appetite for meeting very young men. The police also claimed that Port also had pedophilic tendencies. In 2013, Port started using the drug GHB, which he used to kill all his victims. Gabriel Kavari had been living with Port when he died. Port had bragged about Kavari to his friends. Yet it appeared that Kavari didn't reciprocate the feelings. Port told his friends different stories about Kavari's absence. He told them that he had moved to Spain to live with another partner. Using a false identity, Port told one of Kavari's former partners another story, but the police didn't connect Port to Kavari's death. 3 weeks after Kavari's death, Port arranged to meet 21-year-old Daniel Whitworth through the site Fit Lads. After Whitworth died, Port deleted his Fit Lads account to erase any evidence of communication between the two. On October 5, 2015, about a month after Taylor's murder, the police arrested Port. After that, 8 men, ranging in age from 19 to 35, contacted the police and said that they had been assaulted by Port. Their identities were never revealed in the media or court records. Port had lured them through dating apps, drugging them, and then he had his way with them. In some cases, Port used a syringe to drug them. Other times he spiked an applicator under the pretense of lubrication before having anal sex. The police also found evidence that connected him to the 4 murdered men, like his DNA was on Kavari's glasses. The police were heavily criticized for not doing a more in-depth investigation into the 4 men's deaths. For example, Whitworth, the man Port framed for Kavari's murder, had bruises under his armpits and his neck and chest. The medical examiner thought this indicated that his body had been moved. The police also found a blue bedsheet with Kavari's body, which was never sent for DNA analysis. Also, a handwriting expert was never brought in to analyze the supposed suicide note. After Port was arrested, they compared his handwriting to the handwriting on the note. An expert determined it was a match. Port maintained he never killed anyone. Stephen Port went to trial for the 4 murders plus other charges in November 2016. The prosecution said that Port lured men through dating apps. He lied in his profile, saying that he studied at Oxford and he worked as a special needs teacher. Then, once in his apartment, Port drugged his victims with GHB and raped them. Toxicology reports also revealed that other drugs were in their systems, such as poppers, Viagra, mephedrone, and crystal meth. Some of the surviving victims told the court how Port attempted to drug them with a syringe or how they were raped. Port sometimes recorded himself having sex with unconscious men. A 24-year-old victim testified he didn't know that Port raped him until the police showed him the video. Some of this footage was shown to the jurors. During Port's trial, the judge accepted Port's lawyer's argument that he never intended to kill his victims. But the judge argued he should have known the risk after his first victim died. The judge also noted that Port had made plans to obtain the drugs. This was enough evidence to convict him of murder under English law. On November 16, 2016, Stephen Port was convicted of assaults by penetration, rape, and the murder of Anthony Walgate, Gabriel Kavari, Daniel Whitworth, and Jack Taylor. He was also convicted of raping 3 other men that he had drugged, 10 counts of administering a substance with intent, and 4 sexual assaults. In total, Port was convicted of victimizing 11 men. The judge sentenced Port to life imprisonment with a whole life order, meaning Port is unlikely to receive parole and probably will never be released from prison. The aftermath was felt in the Metropolitan Police Department. Many people, especially those in the gay community, were outraged that the police did not properly investigate the murders. Taylor's family sued the Metropolitan Police Department, claiming that Port wouldn't have stopped killing people. The investigation was only brought on because they had pressured the police to investigate. The Independent Office of Police Conduct, or the IOPC, investigated up to 17 officers for potential disciplinary action. In 2016, the police looked at 58 more deaths of GHB overdoses for the previous 4 years for potential connections. If they found any, Port was not charged in connection with them. In 2019, the IOPC concluded that there was no misconduct by the Metropolitan Police. However, 9 officers had to improve their standards. They did say that the police investigation was materially flawed, which was the result of understaffing. The Metropolitan Police apologized to the family. The victims' families were not satisfied, and they continued to fight to have the Metropolitan Police investigated. They believe that the investigations were poorly done because the victims were gay men. So the IOPC reopened the case in June 2022. In August 2022, the Metropolitan Police settled with the families of Walgate and Cavari and Daniel Whitworth's partner. Number 1. Russ Faria. Russell Faria, who went by Russ, spent most Tuesday nights with his friends. They often played a role-playing game. On Tuesday, December 27, 2011, 42-year-old Russ left his home in Troy, Missouri around 5:30 to go to his friend's home. His friend lived in Lake St. Louis, Missouri, which is about 20 miles from his home. That night, they didn't have enough people to play the game, so they just watched movies. He left his friend's home around 9 p.m. On his way home, he stopped at an Arby's restaurant and got some food. Around 9:40 p.m., Russ returned home and found his 41-year-old wife, Elizabeth Faria, dead. His wife, commonly known as Betsy, had been stabbed 55 times. A serrated knife was still embedded in her neck. Her body was cold to the touch, meaning she had been dead for hours. Russ immediately called 911, telling the dispatcher that his wife may have killed herself. Betsy had been diagnosed with breast cancer earlier that year, and it was terminal. She had talked about suicide multiple times. When investigators arrived, they immediately knew that Betsy's death was too gruesome to have been a suicide. They knew they were investigating a homicide. As in most cases, the first suspect is the victim's romantic partner. In this case, that was Russ Faria. The police thought that Russ's 911 call was suspicious. She believed that Russ was going in and out of hysteria and he was just acting. But Russ had a solid alibi for the time of the murder. 4 of his friends said that they were with him around the time of the murder. On his way home, Russ bought sandwiches from Arby's and he had a receipt for the food. Plus, surveillance footage proved he was at the restaurant. No physical evidence tied Russ to the murder. There was no blood on his clothes. The clothes Russ was wearing when the police responded to the call were the same clothes he was wearing at Arby's. However, the police did find his slippers hidden in a closet and they were smeared in blood. The police spoke to Betsy's best friend, Pamela Hupp. She and Betsy had been friends for 10 years, working in the insurance industry together. Hupp told the police that Russ was an aggressive drinker who verbally abused his sick wife. She told the police about a Word document on Betsy's computer where Betsy wrote she was worried about being murdered by Russ. According to Hupp, Betsy had a series of affairs and she was about to tell Russ about them. Hupp was the last person to see Betsy alive. She had insisted on driving Betsy home from her chemotherapy session that afternoon. But Betsy declined because she had a ride and she was going to her mother's home. Hupp was then adamant that she would pick Betsy up at her mother's home and drive her home. Betsy accepted that ride. Hupp said she dropped Betsy off around 7 p.m. Hupp said she stayed in the area and called her own husband a little after 7 p.m. She claimed that at 7:27 she called Betsy to tell her she made it home safely, but there was no answer. Russ Faria was charged with murder on the same day as his wife's funeral. He went to trial in November 2013. Russ's lawyer, Joel Schwartz, pointed out that there was little physical evidence connecting him to the murder. The only evidence was the slippers with blood that were hidden in the closet. Schwartz argued that the killer planted those to frame Russ. Plus, Russ had an alibi for the time of the murder. Russ had 4 friends who claimed he was with them from about 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Pam Hupp said she dropped Betsy off at home around 7 p.m. So at that time, Russ was at his friend's home. Russ also had the receipt from Arby's and he was recorded on CCTV. The prosecutor, Lee Askey, argued that Russ's friends helped him cover up the murder. They all lied and said he was with them at the time of the murder. Askey said that after Russ murdered his wife, he went to Arby's to establish an alibi. She also argued that the 911 call was staged. The supervisor of the 911 dispatcher who took the call testified, and she thought that Russ was putting on an act. But oddly, the 911 dispatcher who took the call did not testify. A police officer testified that at the crime scene, they found a blood trail that led to the drawer with towels in it, and it appeared that someone had attempted to clean up the crime scene. He said that only someone with intimate knowledge of the house would have known the towels were there. Had it been someone unfamiliar with the house, they would have found blood in other places as they searched for a towel. The officer said there were no crime scene photos because the camera malfunctioned. Hubb testified in the trial. She claimed that Betsy and Russ's relationship was volatile and Russ was abusive. But besides Hubb's testimony, there was no other evidence that Russ was abusive. Hubb told the court that she was named beneficiary to Betsy's $150,000 insurance policy that was taken out 5 days before her murder. Hubb claimed that the $100,000 was to be put in a trust for Betsy's daughters. The other $50,000 was to go to a friend of her and Betsy's who also had cancer. Russ claimed he knew nothing about this policy, but he was the beneficiary of another $100,000 plan. Hubb said that Betsy planned on leaving Russ and she didn't trust her family to handle the money. In the prosecutor's closing argument, she claimed that Russ killed Betsy while naked, showered, and then put his clothes on. But none of this was backed up by evidence. There was no blood found in the shower drain. There was also no evidence that anyone had showered that night. Despite strong evidence supporting Russ's innocence, the jury convicted him of first-degree murder after 4 hours of deliberation. Russ Faria was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. Russ's biggest problem with the trial was because of Missouri law, he couldn't present an alternative suspect because there was no physical evidence that connected an alternative suspect to the murder. His lawyer, Joel Schwartz, was sure that the real killer was Pamela Hupp. She had framed Russ for murder and got away with it. The police had never considered Hupp a suspect, just a credible witness. The conviction did not sit well with people. In March 2014, Fox 2 and the St. Louis Dispatch published a jointly written article of their findings on the Russ Faria case. The article strongly implicated that Pam Hupp was the killer and she had framed Russ. According to the story, Hupp never gave any of the money to Betsy's daughters. She had set up a trust shortly before the trial, but took all the money out of it days after the trial. As for the other $50,000 that was supposed to go to their cancer-ridden friend, she still had it. Hupp claimed that her friend died before she could give it to her. The article also pointed out that Hupp gave contradictory information to the police. At one point, Hupp said she never entered Betsy's home. But then she later told them that she went inside, and she went as far as the living room. The article also brings up things that were not revealed to the jury. According to cell phone records, when Pam Hupp called Betsy at 7:27 p.m., she was still in Betsy's neighborhood. But Hupp claimed she was at home when she made that call. She said she was calling Betsy to tell her that she had made it home safely. Why would she lie about that? Also, what was she doing in Betsy's neighborhood nearly half an hour after she supposedly dropped her off? Hupp was asked to take a polygraph, but her doctor wrote her a note saying that she had a head injury and was on medication, which meant her results may not be accurate. Turned out that Hupp had specifically asked her doctor for the note, so the police didn't give her a polygraph exam. Also, other friends of the couple disputed Hupp's claim that Betsy and Russ had a volatile relationship. They said that the marriage had its rough spots, but things had recently gotten better. The reporters also talked to the 911 dispatcher who took the call. She believed that Russ's emotions were genuine. She said it's common for people to swing between being calm and hysterical when dealing with something so traumatic. In April 2014, Betsy's daughters sued Pam Hupp for the life insurance money. At a deposition in July 2014, Hupp testified that the money was never supposed to go to the daughters. She said that the police and the district attorney had pressured her to say that because it would help with their case. If the money was going to her, it might make it look like she had a motive to kill Betsy. This would have allowed Russ's lawyer to present Hub as an alternative suspect. In October 2014, Joel Schwartz filed a motion arguing that Russ should receive a new trial for two reasons. The first was that if Hub always intended to keep the money, this was evidence of a motive, making her a viable alternative suspect. Secondly, there was evidence that at the time of the murder, the prosecutor, Lee Askey, was having an affair with one of the investigators on the case, Michael Lang. Lang testified at the trial. Russ's lawyer received a printout of an email exchange between the two. In the email, Lang wrote, "I will do my best to be everything you need." Lang was the detective who made the decision not to request data that would have mapped Russ's cell phone location on the night of the murder. This would have backed up Russ's alibi. In February 2015, an appeals court made the rare move of ordering a judge to revisit several issues in the case. Then in June 2015, Russ's conviction was overturned and he was ordered to stand trial again. Russ Faria went to trial again in November 2015. This time he elected to be tried by judge and not jury. Pam Hub did not testify at the second trial. Joel Schwartz was Russ's lawyer again. This time he argued that the real killer was Pam Hub. By her own admission, Hub was the last person to see Betsy alive. She had also lied to the police about her whereabouts at the time of the murder. She was near Betsy's house at the time of the murder. She also had a motive, the money from the life insurance policy. A detective also testified that Hub told him she and Betsy had been lovers. She said that Betsy was going to tell Russ about the affair on the night she was killed. This was an entirely new story from Hub. She initially told the police that Betsy was having a series of affairs. And this was just one example where Hub had lied. The officer who testified in the first trial about the blood trail leading to the drawer with the towels, that the crime scene had been cleaned up, and that there was no crime scene photos, testified again. He gave similar testimony. Schwartz then surprised the detective by handing him 132 crime scene photos. It turns out that the photos had been developed, but they did not show a blood trail to the drawer with the towels, or that the crime scene had been cleaned up. Since the photos didn't back up the theory, the police had lied and said there were no photos. Someone in the prosecutor's office had secretly sent Schwartz the photos. So that police officer had perjured himself on the stand twice. The supervisor of the 911 operator testified again. She claimed that based on her experience of listening to 911 calls, Russ was acting. The judge stopped her from testifying. The trial lasted a week. Russ Faria was acquitted of Betsy's murder. He had spent 3 years in prison for a murder he had not committed. In February 2016, Betsy's daughters lost the civil case against Pam Hub. The judge ruled that if Betsy wanted her daughters to have the money, she would have made them the insurance policy beneficiaries. In July 2016, Russ brought a civil suit against 3 police officers, claiming they fabricated evidence against him and failed to investigate the other obvious suspect. After Russ was acquitted, investigators reopened the case, and this time, the prime suspect was Pam Hub. Then, something disturbing happened in August 2016, more than a year after the second trial. On August 16th, Pam Hub called the police to her home. She had shot a man to death. He was identified as 33-year-old Louis Gumpenberger, a man with physical and mental impairments from a 2005 car accident. She claimed that Gumpenberger was a stranger to her. She said she returned home and Gumpenberger got out of his vehicle. He then got into the passenger seat and threatened her with a knife. He demanded she take him to the bank because he was ordered to get Russ's money. She claimed she was able to knock the knife out of his hand. She then escaped into the house, but Gumpenberger followed her inside. She said she managed to get into the bedroom where she had a gun. She then shot Gumpenberger to death. In Gumpenberger's pockets were $900 and a note with instructions to kidnap Hub and get Russ's money. The police were immediately suspicious. They believed that Hub was once again trying to frame Russ and distract investigators. It turned out that 6 days before the deadly shooting, a woman contacted the police about a strange incident. She said that a woman driving an SUV introduced herself as a producer for the true crime show, Dateline. The woman in the SUV wanted her to record a reenactment of a 911 call. She had offered her $1,000. The woman initially agreed to do it, but then backed out when the woman claiming to be the producer couldn't provide credentials to prove that she was from the show. The woman had video from a security camera at her house and it recorded the woman's SUV. The police ran the license plate. The SUV belonged to Pam Hub. Also, Hub claimed she didn't know Gumpenberger, but cell phone records showed that she had been in this neighborhood about an hour before the shooting. In Gumpenberger's pockets were 9 $100 bills. Another $100 bill was found on Hub's dresser. Its serial numbers were sequential to 4 of the bills in Gumpenberger's pocket. Also, the police were suspicious about the 911 call. That day, Pam had called 911 twice before she called to report shooting Gumpenberger. Both times she hung up without saying anything. When she did call to report the shooting, there were 2 to 3 seconds of dead air. The police thought that this was unusual. In similar circumstances, the caller usually starts talking right away. But another odd thing was that Gumpenberger's body was on a carpet swath. The police thought that Hub had him stand there and shot him so that her carpet wouldn't get dirty with blood. Hub claimed that Gumpenberger threatened her with a knife. The police tracked down where the knife was purchased. It was from a dollar store. The police got a record of the transaction. Also purchased in the transaction was the notepad, which the note was written on, and some air fresheners. The same kind of air fresheners were found in Hub's house. Hub claimed she knocked the knife out of Gumpenberger's hand, but it was found in an odd spot in her SUV. It was wedged between the center console and the passenger seat. Hub stored her knives in a similar way in her kitchen between the counter and the stove. Another problem was Gumpenberger's cognitive and physical abilities. Notably, he couldn't drive, so how did he get to Hub's home? The police theorized that Hub encountered Gumpenberger randomly. She offered him a chance to record a line for Dateline. She went to his home, picked him up, and brought her back to her house. She made him stand on the carpet swath and then shot him to death. Less than a week after the shooting of Gumpenberger, on August 23, 2016, Hub was charged with murder. After she was arrested, she stabbed herself several times with a ballpoint pen that she had snuck into her cell. She was taken to the hospital and survived her wounds. After her arrest made the news, a man contacted the police. He said that Hub had also approached him, pretending to be someone from Dateline. About a month later, the police opened a third murder investigation into Pamela Hub. Nearly 2 years after Betsy was killed, in October 2013, Hub's 77-year-old mother, Shirley Newman, was living in a retirement home. She had Alzheimer's disease. Near the end of the month, she had been hospitalized. On October 30, 2013, Hub picked her mother up at the hospital and brought her to the retirement home. As Hub was leaving, she told the staff to notify the family if her mother didn't come down for breakfast. Newman didn't show up for breakfast or lunch. That afternoon, her dead body was found on the lawn below her third-story apartment. It appeared she had fallen. At the time, her death was labeled an accident, but there were some oddities. Toxicology reports showed that there was a high level of the sedative, Ambien, in her bloodstream. It was 8 times the level of the prescribed amount. Also, when someone falls off a balcony, they usually go over the railing, but it appeared that Newman went through the railing. 2 vertical bars had been knocked off and were on the lawn near her body. Another bar was broken in half, and part of it was still attached to the railing. Hubb, the last person to see her mother, inherited $500,000. Before Russ's second trial, the prosecutor, Lee Askey, interviewed Hubb. At some point, they talked about her mother, and she said, "People say I killed her. We had sold her house, her car, and everything she owned, and put her in a home. To everybody else on this planet, I took a 210-pound woman and threw her through railings. How do you do that? How does a man do that?" Both Dayline and Fox 2 asked engineers about the damage to the railing. They said it would have taken a lot of force for someone to do that. They said it was very unlikely that a 77-year-old woman with a bad back could have taken a running dive through it. Pam also said something odd to the police about her mother 4 months before she mysteriously died. Hubb said, "I really hate to say it. If I wanted money, my mom's worth $500,000 that I could get when she dies. My mom has dementia and doesn't half the time know who we are. She's been living alone in a condo, and I know that sounds really morbid and stuff like that, but I'm a life insurance person. If I really wanted money, there was an easier way than trying to combat somebody that's physically stronger than me. I'm just saying." In November 2017, the medical examiner changed the cause of death from accidental to undetermined. The prosecution announced in March 2017 they would be seeking the death penalty against Pamela Hubb in the murder of Louis Gumpenberger. Hubb's defense lawyer filed motions that argued that details about Betsy Ferrera's murder shouldn't be talked about at Hubb's trial. But in January 2019, the judge decided to allow the prosecution to bring up Betsy's murder. 6 months later, in June 2019, Hubb entered an Alford plea. With an Alford plea, the accused acknowledges that there's enough evidence to convict, yet they don't have to admit guilt. In exchange for the plea, the prosecution dropped the death sentence. Instead, Hubb was sentenced to life without the chance of parole. In March 2020, Russ Faria was awarded $2.2 million in his lawsuit against the county. In July 2021, Pamela Hubb was charged with Betsy Ferrera's murder. 2 years later, in October 2023, the district attorney refiled the charges to petition the trial to be in a county closer to Lincoln County. Hubb is expected to go to trial in the summer of 2025. As of early 2024, Pam Hubb has not been charged in connection with the murder of her mother, Shirley Newman. The story of Pam Hubb was the basis for the NBC miniseries The Thing About Pam, which was released in 2022. At the time of this recording, 65-year-old Pamela Hubb is serving her sentence at the Chillicothe Correctional Center in Chillicothe, Missouri. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Please don't forget to check out our new channel, Paranormally Listed. There's a link on the screen now, and there's a link in the description box below this video. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.